Welcome to the Clearground Show. I'm your host, Dr. G, with a PhD. I hope everybody had an excellent Christmas weekend. We've, of course, got a lot of news for you guys, and we're going to pick up where we left off last week, and that's with the Sixth Circuit of Appeals and the Supreme Court and the vaccine mandates. After that, I'm going to expose you guys to an extremely disturbing video of dancing nurses from the White House, and I'll go into that story a little bit and show why it's even worse than it looks on its surface. From there, I'm going to do another segment on how the vaccines were originally sold to us as a bill of goods and what they are right now. And it's really important that we understand this evolution because it shows exactly where we're going. And so we'll do that for a second, and then we'll talk about a myocarditis story in Nature and an amendment to that paper that came over the weekend, and it's got some huge implications. I'm excited to talk about that. From there, we'll talk about some canceled flights over the Christmas holidays due to Omicron, and we'll do some international stories from Ecuador and the UK. We'll wrap today up with a couple of science stories, one that's a real story about the new telescope, and the other from CNN Health, which, just to name CNN Health, should be all the indication you need as to how that story is going to go. So let's dive on in. So this came out December 21st, and the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals decides to reinstate the vaccine mandate. So the title of this article is Sixth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals reinstates vaccine mandate for businesses with 100 employees. On Friday, December 17, 2021, the Sixth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals lifted the stay on the Occupational Safety and Health Administration's vaccine mandate, the OSHA rule. Now, on this show, we're all familiar, but just to state from the article, the OSHA rule requires businesses with 100 or more employees to implement the Biden administration's vaccine or testing rule, which means employees must be fully vaccinated or, if not fully vaccinated, must wear masks in the workplace and undergo weekly testing for COVID-19. Previously, the OSHA rule had been blocked by the Fifth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. Several similar vaccine court challenges were consolidated for review, and the Sixth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals was tasked for the review. In its ruling, the Sixth Circuit lifted the vaccine mandate hold because the government, quote, demonstrated the pervasive danger that COVID-19 poses to workers, unvaccinated workers in particular, in their workplaces, end quote. Following the Sixth Circuit decision, the Labor Department released a statement indicating that businesses will have until January 10th of 2022 to develop compliant policies with the OSHA rule. It also provided that the department will not issue citations for noncompliance until February 9th, 2022 for businesses making, quote, good faith, end quote, efforts to implement the testing requirements. The very next day, December 22nd, the Supreme Court announced they'll be hearing arguments on the Biden vaccine rules. The U.S. Supreme Court said it will hear arguments on an expedited basis on President Joe Biden's COVID-19 shot or test rule for large employers and a separate vaccine mandate for healthcare workers. The justices will take up both cases on January 7th. One involves an Occupational Safety and Health Administration rule that requires employers with 100 or more workers to make them get vaccinated or be tested regularly. The other, issued by the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, requires vaccinations for employees at facilities that participate in the Medicare and Medicaid healthcare programs. So if you guys have been listening to the show for a while, you'll know my opinion on these cases and you'll know about these cases. So what do I think is going to happen here? I think that January 6th and 7th are going to come and go, and the Supreme Court is just hearing oral arguments, so I don't think a decision is going to be made at this time. So what that means is that the Sixth Circuit stay is going to stay. And so these companies will be forced by mandate to comply with this Biden ruling. Now, ultimately, I think the Supreme Court is going to overturn this. I think they have every reason to. So the long term, I think, looks good for people that do not want this mandate. The short term looks good for people that do want the mandate. And that's unfortunate. And I'm curious to see what companies do, if they're going to fold or if they're going to fight it some more. But we'll keep you guys posted on these stories. Let's go to the next one. Now, what I'm about to show you guys is extremely disturbing. I apologize in advance. But, you guys got the ticket. Here's the ride. Let's watch these nurses dance and sing in the East Room of the White House.
The tree before my spirit falls again. Fill up the stockings. I might be rushing things, but deck the halls again now.
Oh, we need a little Christmas right this very minute. Candles in the window, carols at the spinning. Yes, we need a little Christmas right this very minute. It hasn't snowed a single flurry, but Santa dear, we're in a hurry.
So for the entire time of this pandemic, I have not been a fan of the nurses dancing on TikTok theme that has popped up. And I guess it popped up to kind of be inspirational to say, hey, there's still, smiles to be had in dark times. I found it to be disrespectful to patients in the hospitals. I also found it to be, I found the juxtaposition between the terribleness of the pandemic and the dancing nurses and doctors. It didn't sit well with me. So combine that with another thing. This might be the most controversial opinion I've had on the show so far, but I love Christmas music. So you combine this trend that I really didn't like with the fact that I love Christmas music all in the White House, and it's just a terrible combination for me personally. But upon closer inspection of this video, it's actually even more insulting than just the surface level that I described. So zooming in on this Hillary Clinton-esque looking nurse, if you look at her insignia on her scrubs, it says Northwell Health. I did a little searching, and we discussed this story back in October before I went to YouTube. But this is the same hospital system that laid off 1,400 employees who weren't vaccinated. So in a time of, in many places, self-made healthcare shortages, and with all of these talking threats of Omicron looming and it's going to run our health system dry, the Biden administration brought a bunch of nurses to sing and dance to Christmas carols from the hospital that fired a bunch of employees. The whole thing is just such an insult at every level. I can't believe that this actually was a real thing that happened last week. Speaking of things that insult our intelligence, let's take a look back in time here at how Rachel Maddow was talking about vaccines and what that meant for the population if we took them back in March. Remember, this is a mainstream news show.
It means that instead of the vaccine being able, instead of the virus being able to hop from person to person to person to person, spreading and spreading, sickening some of them, but not all of them. And the ones that it doesn't sicken don't know they have it. And then they give it to even more people because they didn't recognize they were, right? Instead of the virus being able to hop from person to person to person, potentially mutating and becoming more virulent and drug resistant along the way, now we know that the vaccines work well enough that the virus stops with every vaccinated person. A vaccinated person gets exposed to the virus. The virus does not infect them. The virus cannot then use that person to go anywhere else. It cannot use a vaccinated person as a host to go get more people. That means the vaccines will get us to the end of this if we just go fast enough.
That was aired on March 29th of 2021. So that was 9 months ago. So we'll discuss a paper on this, on myocarditis and vaccines in younger men in a little bit here. But this is important because look at how fast this progressed. We went from what Rachel Maddow said, from 100% effective against infection. You cannot spread it with this thing. Furthermore, we'll give you free donuts like they did in New York. We'll enter you in lottery systems like they did in other places around the U.S. to get the vaccine. So we'll do all these things for this vaccine that's 100% effective. And now they're saying, well, look, it's always been known that all it's going to do is reduce symptoms and hospitalization. We've always known that. Oh, and by the way, if you don't get this shot that now is just used for reducing symptoms, we're going to potentially fire you from your work so you can't make a livelihood and you can't provide for you or your family. Oh, and by the way, it's extremely safe for everyone. That's why we're forcing kids in some states as young as 5 to 11 to have 2 shots before going back to school. The whole thing is obviously crazy, and the narrative is crumbling. It's crumbling all over the place. Now we're seeing a majority of vaccinated people with infection. So that doesn't mean they're going to the hospital. In some cases it does, and they're going erroneously to the hospital. We'll talk about that in a second. But what it does mean is that the narrative is crumbling, and we'll see what happens. I think this is going to ruin trust in a lot of institutions for a long time to come, and that's going to wreak havoc on other vaccine programs that actually are effective. Speaking of things we should be skeptical about trusting, apparently the military has made a new vaccine for coronavirus. The title of this article is U.S. Army creates a single vaccine against all COVID and SARS variants, the researchers say. So in the coming weeks, scientists at the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research are expected to announce that they have developed a vaccine that is effective against COVID-19 and all of its variants, even Omicron, as well as previous SARS origin viruses that have killed millions of people worldwide. The achievement is a result of almost 2 years of work on the virus. The Army lab received its first DNA sequencing of the COVID-19 virus in early 2020. Very early on, Walter Reed's infectious diseases branch decided to focus on making a vaccine that would work against not just the existing strain, but all of its potential variants as well. The article goes on. Walter Reed's spike ferritin nanoparticle COVID-19 vaccine, or SPFN, completed animal trials earlier this year with positive results. Phase 1 of human trials wrapped up this month, again with positive results that are undergoing final review. Dr. Kayvon Mojarrad, director of Walter Reed's infectious diseases branch, said in an exclusive interview with Defense One on Tuesday. The new vaccine will still need to undergo Phase 2 and Phase 3 trials. Unlike existing vaccines, Walter Reed's SPFN uses a soccer ball-shaped protein with 24 faces for its vaccine, which allows scientists to attach the spikes of multiple coronavirus strains on different faces of the protein. It's very exciting to get to this point for our entire team, and I think for the entire army as well, Mojarrad said. The vaccine's human trials took longer than expected, he said, because the lab needed to test the vaccine on subjects who had neither been vaccinated nor previously infected with COVID. Increasing vaccination rates and the rapid spread of the Delta and Omicron variants made that very difficult. With Omicron, there's no way really to escape this virus. You're not going to be able to avoid it. So I think pretty soon either the whole world will be vaccinated or have been infected. If you want to read a little bit more on this vaccine, there's links in the description below. This new fad of rushing out these vaccines is terrifying. First of all, when they said the human trials took longer than expected, that's way shorter than normal human trials take. Also strange, so in the very end they admitted everyone's going to be getting Omicron or they're going to be vaccinated. Well, if it's so dang transmissible, and that's the only case that they have right now, either everyone gets it or or everyone gets vaccinated, well, you're late to the game. So maybe your vaccine should go through the normal process and take its time and figure out the long-term safety instead of being rushed out. This is a giant red flag for me and a no thank you. In more military news, this comes from Fox. A U.S. Navy warship remains in port after COVID-19 breaks out among 100% immunized crew. A U.S. Navy warship held off on deploying to South America last week after an outbreak of COVID-19 among its vaccinated crew. The USS Milwaukee, a littoral combat ship, remained in port at Naval Station Guantanamo Bay following positive tests from some of its sailors, some of whom exhibited mild symptoms, according to a Friday announcement from the U.S. Navy. Quote, the crew is 100% immunized and all COVID-19 positive sailors are isolated on board and away from other crew members, the release explained. A portion of these infected have exhibited mild symptoms. The press release also says the vaccines continue to demonstrate effectiveness against serious illness. The Navy had set November 28th as the deadline for all service members to receive vaccination against COVID-19. More than 98% of all active duty sailors have been fully vaccinated, according to the most recent data. The Navy did not say how many sailors had tested positive from the ship's crew, which contains a little more than 100 people, but said the ship is, quote, following an aggressive mitigation strategy in accordance with Navy and CDC guidelines, end quote. The USS Milwaukee began its deployment from Mayport, Florida on December 14th and was scheduled to head to the U.S. Southern Command region until the outbreak. The first major outbreak of COVID-19 among members of the military was in early 2020 when the aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt had to stay in Guam for about 2 months after more than 1,000 of its 4,800 member crew tested positive. One sailor on the ship died from the disease. Of course, it's going to be hard to say whether this is the vaccine's doing or the fact that Omicron, if it is Omicron, is significantly more mild, or the fact that these are young, relatively healthy people getting infected with a disease that doesn't usually impact young, healthy people that badly. But again, because the media keeps hyping up Omicron in such a way and the government keeps hyping up Omicron in such a way, we get stories like this Navy one and stories like this out of Vermont. This out of WCAX3, COVID positive Vermonters with no symptoms are clogging up ERs. Some Vermonters who are able to find antigen tests and then test positive are clogging up emergency rooms. The emergency department at the Rutland Regional Medical Center has been overwhelmed with asymptomatic folks. Dr. Rick Hildebrandt is RRMC's medical director. He says some people who test positive with a rapid test go to the emergency room looking for a PCR test. The Vermont Hospital Association says it's hearing similar stories from other parts of the state. Hildebrandt says those who are asymptomatic and receive a positive antigen test should stay home and reach out to their primary care provider. He says the only time to go to the ER is if you have a positive test and are very sick. Of course. Hildebrandt says the flood of asymptomatic people is preventing others in need of immediate care from getting it. It's not so much the beds that are the precious resource, it's the staff at this time. So we have to have some of our clinical staff providing care to these people, and they can't provide care to the folks in the ER. So now we have a very interesting situation, which I think we're going to see across the states. We have hospitals that are short-staffed. Why are they short-staffed? Because many of the staffers were furloughed due to their vaccination status. Now we have a bunch of people who are vaccinated, who are fearful of COVID, and they're going into the ER asymptomatic, looking for PCR tests and medical aid. So of course, there's not infinity time, so doctors have to triage this situation, and they're getting flooded in these locations that have limited resources. ERs are for sick people, everybody. They're for sick people. If you're super sick with COVID, the ER is for you. If you're super sick with other things, the ER is for you. The ER is not for people who are healthy looking to get some prophylactic aid after they get a positive test for Omicron or whatever COVID-19 variant they have. This, again, is a massive result of both the Biden administration and the Rachel Maddows of the world that are just telling people sort of nonsense. Even at the time, there was contradicting ideas, there was debate to be had, and there was not allowed to be any debate. It wasn't allowed to happen. So now people are in this milieu of fear for COVID, and it's really messing up our society. It's gotten to the point where people are ashamed of getting COVID. So there's a couple of headlines I'll throw up here, but there's many, many more online. Look, if you get COVID, which is a highly contagious and transmissible disease, you shouldn't feel ashamed. Even though they've turned it into this sort of moral thing where, look, if you got the vaccine, you're morally superior, you're a good person, you shouldn't be affected by this disease, you'll get it. Everyone's going to get Omicron. It's not that big of a deal. Don't feel ashamed. Instead of feeling ashamed, if you get really sick, go get treatment. That's about it. This whole feeling of shame and moral superiority that has come with COVID and with this conversation is not good, and we need to drop it ASAP. So now I'm briefly going to discuss this Nature paper that was released. I guess it's in pre-publication. The title of the paper is Risk of Myocarditis, Pericarditis, and Cardiac Arrhythmias Associated with COVID-19 Vaccination or SARS-CoV-2 Infection. The original hype surrounding this paper was this particular graph. And what it shows is this, that if you look at the mRNA vaccines for Moderna compared to the SARS-CoV-2 disease itself, there's more cases of myocarditis in people under the age of 40 after the second dose of Moderna than from the disease of SARS-CoV-2. So many scientists asked the authors of the paper for a breakdown of this actual data so they could see more specifically who's getting myocarditis where. On December 25th, the authors released this update to the paper. So with this update, it's clear that if you're below the age of 40 and a male, you are more likely to get myocarditis from both the second and third shots, if you get a third shot, of Pfizer and both shots of Moderna. So again, if you're a parent and you're questioning things and you want to take some time, this just bolsters your response. And I think it should be taken into account. And I think leaders should look at this and hold off on all of these mandatory vaccinations for COVID for kids. This paper also kind of is the foot in the door of the health implications long-term for this vaccine. And, we should be discussing this a lot more in the news channels. Our government should be talking about it, but will they? I don't know. I don't think so. Also, are we going to see any actual change from these government leaders? Probably not. Now for some COVID news around the world. So COVID travel misery for tens of thousands as flights are canceled. This is an update from the BBC. So more than 7,500 flights have now been canceled since Friday over the Christmas weekend, according to FlightAware data tracking website. So Chinese and U.S. airlines appear to be the hardest hit, with further delays and cancellations announced for Monday. On Sunday alone, there were more than 2,400 flights canceled, 800 of which were to or from U.S. airports, according to FlightAware. The worst hit U.S. companies are Delta, United, and JetBlue, with United warning that the Omicron cases had a direct impact on our flight crews and the people who run our operations. Now reading from The Hill, Ecuador makes COVID-19 vaccines mandatory for all eligible residents. So the ministry stated that the country has enough vaccines in stock to immunize all of its residents and stressed that the vaccines are considered to be safe and effective. Roughly 77% of Ecuador's population over the age of 5 is fully vaccinated against the coronavirus. The government wants to make that 85% of the population this year. They are joining countries such as Indonesia, Micronesia, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan, which have all issued similar vaccine mandates. And remember, Germany and Austria are also expected to do so next year. Now briefly stopping by the UK to announce that door-to-door COVID jabs might be on the horizon. This is coming from the Daily Mail. Now before I start, I think I read something or some headline popped up that Boris Johnson is not going to do any new lockdowns, and he announced that earlier today, which is great news. But moving to the article, door-to-door teams are going to be armed with COVID jabs, and they will be sent to the homes of unvaccinated Britons in plans being considered by ministers to reach the estimated 5 million people yet to be inoculated. It's being seen partially as a way to get jabs to rural areas or households where people cannot easily get to a vaccination center. One cabinet minister backed the plan saying, quote, "I think anything that encourages the vaccine hesitant is sensible," before warning, quote, "the mood in the country is hardening against people who refuse to be vaccinated," end quote. MPs and hospitality bosses have warned Boris Johnson not to bring in new restrictions before New Year's Eve or risk devastating businesses. Finally, Health Secretary Sajid Javid said that the rise in first dose uptake was excellent as discussions were ongoing on how to reach more of the unjabbed. So door-to-door jab visits are already being trialed in one area of Ipswich, which led to an extra 150 people getting their first, second, or booster jab in one weekend. This is a pretty scary policy. I don't know how exactly they're going about doing it once they get to the homes, but I'm sure these people can reject and say they don't want it. But for how long? If England keeps going with these policies, it's not going to be pretty. So before ending the show, I want to cover two fun science stories. The first is going to be the James Webb Telescope is in orbit now, or it's on the way to orbit now. This is the most powerful telescope out there now, and it is going to be researching the origins of the Big Bang and the universe and all that cool stuff. So congratulations to NASA and all the people working on this telescope. And finally, this story from CNN Health. The title of the article is "Don't Weigh Me Cards Aim to Reduce Stress at Doctors' Offices." So a body positivity website has created free, quote, "Don't Weigh Me," quote, cards for patients who find stepping on the scale at doctors' offices stressful. The cards are created by California-based morelove.org, and they're available for free to individuals, excluding the cost of postage. There's also the option for businesses to purchase the cards at $35 per 100 cards. Let's take a look at the cards. The front says, "Please don't weigh me unless it's parentheses really medically necessary. If you really need my weight, please tell me why so that I can give you my informed consent." On the back of the card, it says why, because, now here are the bullet points. "Most health conditions can be addressed without knowing my weight. When you focus on my weight, I get stressed, and that's not healthy. Weighing me every time I come in for an appointment and talking about my weight like it's a problem perpetuates weight stigma, a known and serious health risk. And finally, I pursue healthy behaviors regardless of my weight status. See health at every size." This is a terrible fad. Doctors are not telling you your weight because they're trying to be mean. If you are overweight and doctors say lose weight, they're doing it in your best interest. Sometimes it's hard to hear things, but that doesn't make the things that it's hard to hear wrong. It's important that people hear this, and they shouldn't be running away from it. It just so happens that being overweight can lead to many downstream health effects that are not good. So, for example, many times throughout the pandemic, 75% plus of the ICU beds were occupied by obese patients with COVID-19. Now, I don't know why, and I think they're trying to do a lot of research onto why the COVID-19 virus attacked so heavily people that were overweight, but it did. And that's not a hateful statement. That's a statement of fact to allow people to prepare best for COVID-19. And that's the same case with a lot of things when doctors tell you that you're overweight and need to lose weight. They're doing it because they see a trend that being overweight can lead to other health complications. It's not because they're trying to make you feel bad. It's because they're trying to prevent a bad thing from happening. So don't buy these cards and actually talk with your doctor. And with that, we'll wrap up the show. Sorry for going a little over on time. We'll try and do a little bit better on Wednesday. Thank you so much for listening. If you liked it, please share with your friends. Have them subscribe. Let's get more reasonable conversation out there. Stop by my Instagram channel if you want to see the cover art for any of the episodes. And please enjoy this video. I'll see you guys on Wednesday.